Good morning and welcome to Seattle for the 181st meeting of ASA, the Acoustical Society of America. I'm your host, Larry Frum, and for about the next hour or so, we're going to be listening to some great acoustic science, from baby monitors to how singers are dealing with the COVID restrictions with masks. Very interesting stuff. Our first presenter is TJ Flynn from Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, right outside Baltimore, my hometown. And TJ is going to be talking about baby monitors and making them more effective, and already parents who are tuning out on them.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, TJ. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Larry. And thank you so much for being here and tuning in. So I work at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, and today I'm going to talk about nothing that has to do with the research that I do on a day-to-day basis. One of the things that myself and my colleagues set out to do is to make a better baby monitor that is both open source. And before I get into that, I want to tell you why. So a couple ASAs ago, this company, Timpin, which is, they have created an open source audio platform for making a better hearing aid. They created a challenge. They said, we'll give you, or rather sell you, some of our platforms if you go and try to do something cool with them, bring them back at a later ASA, and talk about what you did. So this is that ASA. The reason we decided to go for a baby monitor was because out of the 6 of us who were kind of working on this problem in our spare time, 3, not me included, of my co-authors have had new children. So this is one of them, Tessalani, very cute. And so there's definitely a demand for having a better baby monitor. And I'll tell you what I mean by better in a moment. It's also worth noting that we're primarily acousticians, data scientists, and physicists. We are not C++ programmers. We're not real-time signal processing gurus. And that's one thing that made this problem a little challenging and also very interesting for us. But let's talk about baby monitors a little bit more generally. So baby monitors are very common. A lot of people have had children, and it's a great way for parents and guardians to monitor their kids without having to be in the same room. But typical baby monitor technology often just tries to identify and transmit loud sounds back to the person watching the infant. This is great, but off-the-shelf baby monitors have an issue where they can be triggered by lots of things. That can be the baby that you want to be triggered by. They could also be just otherwise chatter or talking in the room, external traffic noise, musical toys, you name it. And so our idea is that a better baby monitor should be able to distinguish between baby sounds and other loud sounds. And so the first thing that kind of comes to mind when you're trying to think about how to classify a baby sound from a not baby sound is, what does it look like? So here we actually have a recording in the top right of 10 seconds of babies crying, or a baby crying, I should say. And I'm going to see if I can play this. I'll also mention that on my podium here, I have the actual device that we used. Currently, it has a red light on it, or a green light that should indicate that no baby is crying. If I play our 10-second clip here, or at least a bit of it. All right, let's tone that down, a little too real. We might see that it triggered. Now, one of the ways you could try to trigger something like this is just by looking to see when the signal itself exceeds some threshold. And that's great, but it comes with the problem that any other signal that might not be a baby but is loud enough could trigger that signal too. So here we have another signal, and you might not know what it is. It's not a baby. I will play it. It's also recorded off the Timpin. And it is an airplane passing over the house of my co-author. Apparently, this is a pretty frequent thing. So it'd be nice to be able to tell the top from the bottom in a meaningful, reproducible way. So one way to do that is to look at what we call frequency domain processing. And this is when we do something called a Fourier transform to our signals. So what we do is we take measurements, we break them up into 30-ish millisecond samples, and then we take those samples, we run it through a little machine that tells us how much energy it has at different pitches. And so we can look at a plot on the left-hand side of our screen where we've taken the baby cries we just heard and created what we call a spectrogram out of it. On the x-axis, we have time. On the y-axis, we have pitch. And the bright spots are where there's energy. One of the immediate things you can see is that there's energy kind of from low frequencies, 500 hertz, all the way up to 8 kilohertz and above. So babies cry over a pretty broad band. We'll also notice it's very harmonic, so it's periodic. There are these kind of tonals that stretch horizontally across the screen, and they're about 400 to 600 hertz apart, and that's pretty characteristic of babies, as we found. If we compare that against, say, the airplane noise, we'll notice that first, the frequency is kind of over a similar band. It goes very low and up to pretty high frequencies, but the harmonic characteristic, those periodic tones, are different. So what we'd like to do is figure out how to extract that information, the periodicity of these spectra, as we call them, and we can do that using something called cepstral processing. This is when we take another Fourier transform of the Fourier transform we just had. But what does that mean intuitively? Well, what it does is it takes that periodic structure that we saw in the baby cry, and it looks for, and if it's periodic, we'll see a nice, bright kind of line in the bottom. And if we look over at what we call a cepstrogram, which is kind of a switch of the word spectrogram, because somebody was clever back in the day, we'll see that for a baby cry in this cepstral domain, we have a persistent peak that's about 1 over 500 hertz, that 400, 600 hertz periodicity I was talking about. That reflects itself in about a 2 millisecond peak. And that's cool. That's kind of what we'd say maybe is an acoustic fingerprint of an infant crying. On the right-hand side, we have the same thing for an aircraft. And you might think, well, that's pretty bright in about the same place. Is that a problem? Well, if we balance our color bars to where we're looking at the same thing effectively, we'll see that, well, that did not change on that screen. Okay. We'll see that if we look at our color bars and make them equal, we'll see that really there's quite a lot of energy in the baby cry at this 2-ish millisecond cepstral peak, and it's not there in the airplane noise because it's not harmonic. And so what we do in this tympan device is we say, compute the spectrogram, look within about 1.5 to 2.5 milliseconds in this cepstral domain, and see if there's a peak there. And if it exceeds some threshold, that's a baby. If it doesn't, not a baby. And so what does this look like when we actually try to use it on data? So we scrubbed the internet, and I won't get into too much detail about that other than to say I extracted a lot of baby cries from a lot of YouTube videos. And we got, one of the things we wanted to do here is we wanted to compare babies crying versus not babies crying. In this case, what we have is a confusion matrix on the right-hand side, left-hand side of the plot, where the tympan indicated, if the tympan indicated a baby cry when there was a baby cry, that means we have a high number in the top left. If likewise indicated there wasn't a baby cry when there wasn't a baby cry, we get a high number in the bottom right. Where we want all of our numbers to be is kind of on the diagonal, and we see that it's kind of what we see. Out of 30 samples of babies in aircraft, it classified the babies correctly 28 of 30 times, and it classified the aircraft correctly as not a baby 29 out of 30 times. And we did this again for something that's not exactly an aircraft, for traffic noise. It did pretty well. And then we also did it for human speech, just people babbling in a room or off TV. And we can see the performance is not as good. So that 10 right there is 10 times the human speech was classified as a baby when there wasn't a baby. And so one of the things we can note of this is that the cepstral processor does a decent job trying to identify babies, but there are still other sources that can be baby-like. Human speech is one of those. Other things that we noticed: whistling, guitar, upper register, high E on a guitar string. Angry cat meows also can sometimes look like babies. And the other thing to note is that this 2 right here, this is 2 times that a baby was crying and it wasn't detected. That's a very important number that we like to push down for something like this, because you wouldn't want to miss a baby crying. So there's still work to be done. But in conclusion, we kind of, I think, showed a proof of concept that baby monitors can be made smart to better distinguish babies from not babies, and it can be done on an open source platform that even somebody like I can use. Cepstral processing was the way that we did this, and it works pretty well, although human speech can still be tricky for it. And there are many avenues for this. This is a very rich field, so we have by no means exhausted what exists out there. There are ways that we could bring in time domain processing by looking at how babies might cough in time. We can look at multiple different types of metrics in addition to cepstral processing. And then, of course, machine learning, a very popular word, is a very useful tool for this type of a thing. But that's all future work that maybe we could talk about at a later time. So thank you very much, and I'll leave it at that.
Great topic, TJ. I don't have kids myself, but I am very familiar with the angry cat meows. So I can appreciate that the kind of attention-grabbing noise that is.
Exactly.
Couple questions already from the webcast. Would this be an expensive addition to current baby monitors?
So I am not an expert in current baby monitors, but I can say if they have any ability to do real-time processing, it does not take extra memory. It's, as far as the algorithms that we employed, it's very computationally affordable. I would imagine that would not be the primary bottleneck for it.
Okay. What else could this filtration method be applied to?
Oh, that's a terrific question. So, if somebody wanted to know if their cat were angry, that could be a great idea.
I can tell you, I already know when my cat is angry. I don't need a filtration device.
In some cases, you might want to do the inverse of what we're doing. You might want to listen to something but exclude very loud sounds or particular sounds. So you might essentially flip the switch on what we've done, where instead of triggering an alarm to send audio samples through when something is detected, you might want to continuously listen, but say if a particular type of sound is too loud, get rid of it. And I think this type of technology would be useful for that.
I know you mentioned aircraft and road noise, but are there other prevalent noise pollutions that trigger baby monitors?
Again, so this is where one of my colleagues who's had multiple kids would probably be better, but he mentioned several things. So one of the things that often triggered it was a lullaby machine in the baby's room. So the lullaby machine would go off, and that would trigger it, even though it clearly was not the infant. And we actually had some data that was measured on the tympan that included both him and his older daughter in the room chatting, his child Tessa here pictured crying, and also the lullaby machine going on. And we were able to use the tympan on that, and it only triggers during the baby crying because of how we've tuned it. Somebody
watching the webcast is obviously concerned. Have your colleagues been able to get more sleep because of this research?
Well, so the one of my colleagues who's had a few children, I think he's pretty used to it. Two of the other ones, I think, are still very much in the weeds.
Okay.
So we'll let you know next time how they've fared.
I was going to say, you're going to have to come back next year and give us an update on it.
Exactly.
Thank you very much, TJ. Appreciate the knowledge, and hopefully this will help keep people at least alert about what's going on with their baby.
Thank you very much, Larry.
So we're going to take a little break here, come back, and have our second session, so stay tuned.